My parents forced me to pay my sister's debts while I struggled, so I moved out and left them regretting every decision. I'm a 26-year-old guy, and for as long as I can remember, my role in my family was to be the stable one, the one who didn't complain, didn't need much, and didn't fall apart. My parents used to say it proudly, like it was a compliment. "You're mature for your age," my mom would tell relatives, while my younger sister sat beside her being described as sensitive, emotional, someone who needed extra care. Growing up, I learned quickly that my needs were optional. If I was stressed, it meant I was capable. If I was tired, it meant I was strong. When my sister cried, the house stopped. When I stayed quiet, life went on. That imbalance felt normal to me because it was all I knew. I started working part-time earlier than most kids I knew. I saved every paycheck, skipped outings, said no to things I wanted without really thinking about it. There was a strange pride in being able to say, "I don't need help." I told myself independence was strength, that asking for less made me better somehow. Whenever money came up, my parents would casually mention how I was doing fine. Even when I was juggling bills or stressing over rent, the assumption was that I was okay. Meanwhile, my sister's struggles were always treated as emergencies. She was overwhelmed. She was trying her best. She just needed support. I didn't resent her at first. I just absorbed the message that I was better off, more secure, more capable, even when my bank account and mental state said otherwise. That label followed me everywhere, quietly shaping expectations I never agreed to out loud. Looking back now, I realize being called responsible wasn't about who I was. It was about what they could take from me. And I had no idea that this single word would soon become the excuse they used to cross a line I can never forget. This is where things started to feel wrong, even if I didn't have the language for it yet. My sister had always lived differently than me, impulsively, emotionally, loudly, and my parents treated that like a condition instead of a choice. Credit cards showed up before she had steady income. Late fees piled up. Bills went unpaid. Every few months there was something. I remember overhearing my mom on the phone one night, her voice low and urgent, saying, "She's just overwhelmed, she doesn't mean to let things get this bad." When I asked what happened, my dad waved it off. "Nothing you need to worry about," he said. "She's just going through a phase." That phrase, a phase, came up a lot. Missed payments were a phase. Maxed out cards were a phase. Borrowing money from friends and not paying it back was a phase. Each time, my parents stepped in quietly, like a cleanup crew after a storm, making sure none of it touched her sense of comfort. What hurt wasn't just that they helped her. It was how normal it all seemed to them. No lectures. No consequences. No expectations that she'd change. Meanwhile, when I bought something unnecessary, a new phone, a short trip, I'd get comments like, "Make sure you're being smart," or "You don't want to end up struggling." I started noticing how different the standards were. My sister cried, and she was protected. I stayed calm, and I was assumed to be fine. When I tried to gently ask why she kept getting bailed out, my mom snapped, "You know how she is. She can't handle pressure like you can." That sentence stuck with me. It sounded like praise, but it felt like a warning. Because somewhere along the line, helping her stopped being about support, and started becoming an expectation placed quietly on me. I didn't realize it yet, but my parents weren't just managing my sister's mistakes anymore. They were already deciding who would eventually pay for them. The first time they asked me for money, they didn't say it outright. My parents invited me to sit down at the kitchen table one evening, the same table where every serious talk of my childhood had happened. The overhead light was too bright, the room smelled like reheated food, and my mom kept folding and unfolding a napkin in her hands. That should have been my first warning. My dad cleared his throat and said, "Your sister's in a tough spot right now." He explained it slowly, carefully, like he was breaking bad news to a child. A couple of overdue payments. Some stress. Nothing major. My mom jumped in quickly, saying, "She's just overwhelmed, and we don't want this to spiral." Then came the part that made my chest tighten. "You're in a good position," my dad said, not even looking at me. "You've always been smart with money." My mom nodded and added, "This would just be temporary. A short-term thing until she gets back on her feet." I remember staring at the table, tracing a scratch in the wood with my thumb. I asked how much. They gave me a number that felt uncomfortable but manageable. When I hesitated, my mom's voice softened. "You know she doesn't have anyone else," she said. "And you're strong. You always land on your feet." That word again, strong. It worked. I told myself this was what family did. I transferred the money that night, watching my savings dip for the first time in years for something that wasn't mine. No thank you from my sister. No conversation. Just silence. A week later, my parents acted like nothing had happened. Like the money had never left my account. Like this wasn't something I'd feel every time I opened my banking app. What I didn't realize then was that agreeing once had changed everything. Because in their eyes, I hadn't helped anymore. I had proven I was available. After that first payment, something shifted in the house, subtle but unmistakable. No one thanked me, and no one checked in to see how I was doing. Instead, there was this quiet assumption in the air, like I'd stepped into a role without realizing it. The next time my sister hit a rough patch, my parents didn't sit me down at the kitchen table. They mentioned it casually, over dinner, like they were talking about groceries. "She's short again this month," my mom said, stirring her food. "Just until things stabilize." I felt my shoulders tense. I asked how much this time, already knowing the answer didn't really matter. My dad sighed and said, "You're not going to let your sister drown over a technicality, are you?" That was new. It wasn't a request anymore. It was a test of character. I sent the money, then another payment after that. Each time, the justification came faster and the urgency felt less real, like I was funding a lifestyle rather than fixing a crisis. When I tried to slow things down, asked if my sister was changing her spending, asked if there was a plan, my mom snapped, "Why are you interrogating her? She's already stressed enough." I started noticing how my words were treated as threats instead of concerns. Any hesitation on my part was framed as selfishness. "You've always been good with money," my dad said once. "This shouldn't affect you that much." But it did. I stopped buying things for myself without guilt. I stopped talking about my own plans because they were immediately compared to my sister's struggles. When I finally said I was feeling uncomfortable, my mom looked genuinely offended. "We never thought you'd be like this," she said. "Like what?" "Cautious? Tired? Aware?" What hurt the most was how normal it all became. The transfers. The silence. The way my sister never acknowledged what I was losing. And the way my parents stopped seeing my help as generosity and started seeing it as my responsibility. I didn't realize it yet, but by the time I started questioning things, the decision had already been made for me. They weren't asking how much I could give anymore. They were deciding how much they could take. By the time I admitted to myself that something was wrong, my finances were already tightening in ways no one seemed to notice, or care about. I was still working the same hours, still budgeting carefully, but now every month felt like a quiet balancing act. Rent, utilities, groceries, gas. Then my sister's payments layered on top, like a silent tax I never agreed to. When I mentioned feeling stretched, my dad laughed lightly and said, "You're fine. You always figure it out." That sentence made my stomach drop. Because I wasn't fine. I was skipping dentist appointments. I put off fixing my car even when it started making a sound that scared me. I stopped saying yes to friends because spending money on myself felt wrong when I knew another request was coming. At night, I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, doing math in my head instead of sleeping. Meanwhile, nothing changed for my sister. She still went out. Still ordered food. Still talked about trips she wanted to take once things calmed down. Once, when I overheard her joking on the phone about being broke, something inside me twisted. I realized she wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't scared. She was insulated. When I tried again to talk to my parents, my mom's voice hardened. "You're acting like this is hurting you," she said. "You're not the one drowning." That hurt more than I expected. Because it told me exactly how invisible my struggle had become. I started feeling this low-grade anger I couldn't release. I'd smile through conversations, nod when they talked about my sister's stress, and then go home and feel empty. I wasn't just paying money anymore. I was paying peace, security, and parts of myself I didn't know how to replace. The worst part was the guilt. Every time I thought about saying no, I imagined being blamed if everything collapsed. I was trapped between resentment and responsibility, and neither felt survivable. I didn't know it yet, but the reason I felt so uneasy wasn't just the pressure. It was because I was still missing a piece of the truth, one that would make everything I'd already given feel small in comparison. I didn't uncover the truth because my parents decided to be honest. I found it out by accident, on a random afternoon that was supposed to be normal. I was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling on my phone, when my dad asked me to grab some paperwork from the drawer near the desk. As I pulled the folder out, a stack of envelopes slid onto the floor, credit card statements, collection notices, things that clearly weren't meant for me to see. I froze. The numbers on those pages made my chest tighten. The debt wasn't a few overdue payments like they'd told me. It wasn't temporary. It was massive, multiple cards, high balances, months behind. My hands actually started shaking as I added it up in my head. This wasn't a rough patch. This was a crater. When I confronted my parents, I tried to stay calm. I laid the papers on the table and asked, "Why didn't you tell me it was this bad?" My mom didn't answer right away. She just sighed, like I was exhausting her. My dad finally said, "We didn't want to overwhelm you." That sentence broke something in me. "You let me pay without knowing the truth," I said, my voice barely steady. "You made me think this was almost over." My mom snapped back, "Would it have helped if you knew? You would have worried more." That's when it hit me. They hadn't been protecting me. They'd been managing me. Slowly, carefully, feeding me just enough information to keep the money flowing. I wasn't helping my sister recover, I was being positioned as the long-term solution to her mess. I asked if there was a plan. A budget. Any expectation that she'd change. My dad shrugged and said, "We'll figure it out." But I knew then that we didn't include me. I went to my room and closed the door, my heart racing, my head buzzing. Everything I'd sacrificed suddenly felt naive. Every transfer, every skipped expense, every sleepless night, none of it had been honest. That was the moment the story shifted. Because once you realize you're being lied to on purpose, you stop feeling like family. You start feeling like a resource. I didn't explode the way I wanted to. I gave myself a night to breathe, to think, to convince myself that maybe this was still fixable if we just talked like adults. The next morning, I sat my parents down and told them plainly that I couldn't keep paying unless everything was out in the open. No more half-truths. No more surprises. My mom's face tightened immediately. "Why are you making this so dramatic?" she asked. I explained what I'd seen, how much the debt actually was, how scared it made me feel. My dad crossed his arms and said, "You're focusing on numbers instead of people." That was the moment I realized facts didn't matter here, only loyalty did. My sister came into the room halfway through, eyes already glossy like she'd rehearsed it. "I can't believe you do this," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm already barely holding it together." I tried to speak, but my mom cut me off. "Look what you're doing to her," she snapped. "This is why we didn't want to tell you everything." That hurt more than the lies. They weren't just excusing her anymore. They were blaming me for noticing. I was accused of being cold, transactional, selfish. My dad said, "Family doesn't keep score." I wanted to scream that I hadn't kept score. I just finally looked at the bill. When I said I needed boundaries, the room went silent. My mom stared at me like she didn't recognize me. "I never thought you'd abandon your sister," she said quietly. Abandon. That word landed heavy. I walked away from that conversation feeling smaller than I had in years. The truth hadn't brought clarity, it had made me the villain. In that house, honesty wasn't welcome if it threatened the system. And the worst part was realizing they'd already chosen who mattered more. It wasn't the one keeping everything afloat. After that conversation, something inside me shut down. I stopped trying to explain myself because every word I said was twisted into proof that I was heartless. The house felt heavier, like the air itself was judging me. No one asked how I was doing. No one cared that I'd barely slept in days. The only thing that seemed to matter was whether the money would keep coming. My bank account told a story I couldn't ignore anymore. I was down to a few months of emergency savings, something I'd spent years building. Each time I opened my banking app, my chest tightened. I started having this constant buzzing anxiety, like I was always bracing for bad news. Even small expenses made me panic. One night, I sat in my car in the parking lot after work, engine off, staring at the steering wheel. I remember gripping it so hard my hands hurt. I thought about how insane it was that I felt this broken while funding someone else's comfort. I hadn't bought new clothes in months. I was eating the same cheap meals every day. And somehow, I was still the lucky one. When my mom asked for another transfer that week, something snapped. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just said, "I can't." My voice came out flat, like it didn't belong to me. She stared at me and said, "Don't be dramatic. You'll figure it out like you always do." I went to my room and sat on the floor, back against the bed, and stared at the wall until it got dark. For the first time in my life, I felt completely trapped, not just financially, but emotionally. I was exhausted, resentful, and ashamed for letting it get this far. That was my lowest point. Not because I had nothing left to give, but because I finally realized no one in that house cared if giving destroyed me. And once that truth settled in, something dangerous followed it. Clarity. Once the fog lifted, I stopped trying to be understood. I realized every conversation was just another way for them to pull me back into the same role, so I went quiet. Not out of spite, but out of survival. I nodded when my parents talked. I gave short answers. I stopped reacting when my sister complained about her stress like it was the center of the universe. Inside, though, I was planning. Late at night, I searched for cheap apartments, calculating deposits and move-in dates with the same precision I used to budget my savings. I started setting aside small amounts of money they didn't know about, cutting even deeper into my already stripped-down lifestyle. The idea of leaving felt terrifying, but also strangely calming. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. I'd learned that sharing plans in that house only made them targets. My parents still assumed I'd cave eventually. My sister still acted like my wallet was an extension of the family. One night she casually said, "You'll help if things get bad again, right?" I just shrugged. She laughed, confident. That confidence fueled me. Every box I quietly gathered, every document I secured, made me feel like I was reclaiming something they'd taken without permission. I started imagining a life where my money was mine again, where my stress wasn't treated as an inconvenience. There was guilt, too. Years of conditioning don't disappear overnight. I worried about what would happen when I left, about being labeled the bad son, the selfish brother. But then I'd remember sitting on my bedroom floor, numb and alone, and the guilt would loosen its grip. The day I signed the lease, my hands shook. Not from doubt, but from knowing this was irreversible. Once I walked out, there would be no pretending anymore. No quiet sacrifices. No safety net they could lean on. They still thought I was stuck. Still thought I'd stay because I always had. They had no idea I was counting down the days, rehearsing my goodbye in my head, not as an apology, but as a boundary. And they definitely didn't know how hard the silence was about to hit them once I was gone. I didn't announce it. I didn't sit anyone down or ask for understanding. I waited for a morning when the house was empty, when the silence felt thick and final, and I packed my car piece by piece. Clothes, documents, the few things that actually felt like mine. Every drawer I closed sounded louder than it should have, like the house was finally noticing me. Before I left, I wrote a letter. Not an angry one. Not a long one. Just the truth. I said I couldn't keep living like this. That I was done paying for problems I didn't create. That I needed space, peace, and control over my own life. I left it on the kitchen table, right where all of this had started. When I drove away, my hands were shaking so badly I had to pull over a block away. My chest felt tight, like I was doing something illegal instead of necessary. But underneath the fear, there was relief, sharp, unfamiliar, almost painful. For the first time, I wasn't bracing myself for the next demand. The calls started before I finished unloading my car. Missed calls. Voicemails. Texts that shifted quickly from confusion to panic. Where are you? Turned into, this isn't funny, then into, we need to talk right now. When I didn't respond, my sister texted me, furious. You can't just leave. Do you know what you've done? By evening, the tone changed. My mom's voice in a voicemail sounded small, almost scared. She said they were just trying to understand. My dad's message was colder. You're being irresponsible, he said. Running away doesn't solve anything. But the most telling part wasn't what they said. It was why they were panicking. Not because I was gone, but because the money was too. Sitting alone in my new place that night, surrounded by boxes and bare walls, I realized something unsettling. They hadn't chased me because they missed me. They chased me because the system broke. And I knew the next thing they'd try wouldn't be kindness, it would be pressure. The messages didn't stop after that first night. If anything, they multiplied, like panic had unlocked a new urgency. My mom started calling in the mornings now, her voice softer than I'd heard it in years. We just want to talk, she'd say. We're worried about you. The words sounded right, but something about them felt rehearsed, like concern was a tool they were trying out. When I finally agreed to meet them, it wasn't because I wanted reconciliation. It was because I needed to hear them clearly, without the noise of guilt or habit clouding my judgment. We met at a small cafe near their house. The air smelled like burnt coffee and cleaning spray, and my hands were steady in a way they hadn't been for months. That alone told me I'd changed. My mom reached for my hand and said, "We didn't realize how much pressure you were under." I waited. My dad followed it up with, "Things just got out of hand." No apology. No acknowledgement of the lies. Just vague regret, carefully phrased to avoid responsibility. When I asked why they never told me the full truth, my mom sighed and said, "We were doing what we thought was best for everyone." Everyone. Not me. Then my sister spoke. She didn't apologize either. She just looked angry and said, "You really left us with nothing." Like my departure was an act of violence instead of self-preservation. My dad nodded along, adding, "Your sister's struggling now. This isn't the time to make a point." That's when it hit me. They weren't sorry for what they'd done. They were sorry it stopped working. Their regret wasn't about hurting me, it was about losing control, losing the safety net they'd quietly built around my sacrifice. I stood up, heart pounding but clear. I told them I wasn't coming back. Not to the house. Not to the role. Not to the version of myself they preferred. My mom started crying then, real tears this time, but I didn't move. As I walked out, I felt something loosen in my chest. For the first time, their disappointment didn't feel like my responsibility. I just didn't realize yet how far they'd go once they understood I was serious. The fallout didn't come all at once. It came in waves, angry texts, long silences, guilt-laced messages sent late at night. At first, my parents tried to bargain. Then they tried to shame me. When that didn't work, they went quiet, like withdrawing attention might pull me back into place. For years, silence had scared me. This time, it felt like space. My sister stopped reaching out entirely once she realized the money wasn't coming back. That hurt in a way I didn't expect. Not because I missed her, but because it confirmed what I'd suspected all along, that our relationship had been transactional, propped up by what I could provide. Seeing that so clearly was painful, but it was also freeing. Life didn't magically get easy after I left. I still struggled. I still budgeted carefully. But the difference was that every sacrifice I made was mine. When my car finally got fixed, when I bought something small without panic, when I slept through the night without running numbers in my head, it felt like reclaiming pieces of myself I'd given away too early. My parents eventually sent one last message. It said they were disappointed in how I handled things, that families should stick together no matter what. I read it twice, then set my phone down. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to explain. I didn't need to justify my survival to people who only valued me when I was useful. What I've learned since is this: being the responsible one often means being the most convenient one. It means your strength gets mistaken for obligation, and your silence gets mistaken for consent. Walking away wasn't revenge. It wasn't cruelty. It was the first boundary I ever enforced without apologizing for it. I still love my family, in the distant, complicated way you love people who hurt you without ever seeing it. But I don't belong to their emergencies anymore. Leaving didn't make me selfish. It made me free.